My entire life, I've been obsessed with books. I loved reading stories about different kinds of heroes and knights and warriors that went on fantastic adventures, defeating evil villains and saving the day. They possessed the kind of resilience that I always wanted to have. Their lives had meaning. They stood for something. And I wanted to be just like them. There was only one problem. All of my favorite characters were men. In all the books that I read as a child, women had only two passive roles: to be beautiful and to be rescued. And I remember dreaming of breaking those gender stereotypes so that women could join the ranks of the musketeers, solve crimes alongside of Sherlock Holmes, and fight dragons, just like some of the best knights could. And when I brought up this idea to one of my elderly neighbors, she laughed. "Girls don't fight," she said. And when I heard this, I was enraged. I wanted to yell. I wanted to yell how I don't believe in these societal, random, superimposed gender expectations. But, of course, as an 8-year-old, I didn't quite have the vocabulary to describe the fury and the rebellion that I was feeling in that moment. And it was then that my grandfather, a Holocaust survivor and a World War II hero, took it upon himself to become my first ever feminist role model. He pulled me aside and he said, "I have a book for you, but it's written in this invisible ink that you're not old enough to read quite yet. So I'll read it to you for now, and when you're old enough, you can read it by yourself and you can read it to others." And so he took out a blank piece of paper. He moved his finger left to right, as if reading this magical, invisible ink. And he read me a story about a little girl, me, whose brother and male cousins were kidnapped by an evil monster. And in this story, I was the only one who was able to find the monster and stop him before he hurt the members of my family. Without ever making it obvious, my grandfather taught me that gender was irrelevant when it came to heroism. And he taught me that girls could go on adventures too. He taught me that girls could even stand up to men when men were behaving badly. He taught me that our lives are like a blank sheet of paper, and that it's up to us to determine the way that we show up for our own call to adventure. Because too often we might follow somebody else's narrative, play a sidekick in someone else's story, and believe that we must fall in line that was predetermined for us. When I was 21 years old, I worked as a research assistant at a hospital in New York. One day when I was rushing, I tripped and fell down the stairs, hitting my head. As soon as I was able to walk, I went straight to the emergency room, where an emergency room doctor told me that I had a concussion. I was ordered to rest and to refrain from screens and from stress. So I called my then partner, let's call him Jim, although that's not his real name. That night, Jim and I were supposed to see a movie that we've been anxiously anticipating for several months. When I told him that I had a concussion and I was currently in the emergency room and asked him if he could come and pick me up, he said that I should just take a taxi home and that he was still planning to see the movie that he's been waiting to see. I was confused and filled with so many other emotions. I was hurt and heartbroken and angry. I burst into tears and I was pleading with him to come be with me, just to hold my hand. I told him that it would make it easier for me. Jim was silent for a few moments. Then he said, "Look, you're being dramatic and crazy right now. Why should I have to miss out on this film just because you have a concussion? I mean, if I could actually take away your pain, I would be there. But for you to ask me to miss this movie just to hold your hand, That's just plain selfish. Those words, dramatic, crazy, selfish, they cut to the very core of me. And I felt like a burden, an inconvenience, and I felt shame. And what I took away from that conversation and from so many other conversations just like it was that my needs don't matter. I took away that in order to be loved, I need to turn off my needs and my emotions. I started putting on my I am fine mask, putting up with mistreatment, abuse, and even sexual assault. I was taught that my place was to not cause a scene, to be a peacemaker, to not speak up but to shut up, to use my voice only to elevate the voices of others. However, a few years ago I read a research paper that made me rethink that situation between Jim and I. Researchers at University of Virginia and University of Wisconsin-Madison ran a study in which they brought in a group of female participants and recorded their neurological activity and their emotional responses while in the MRI machine. During different parts of the experiment, participants would see a visual signal that would predict when they would get a mild electric shock. This is a mildly painful sensation equivalent to being flicked with a rubber band. When women in the MRI would see the signal indicating that a shock was coming, they understandably experienced higher levels of anxiety and distress, and subsequently experienced levels of pain when the shock was administered. Participants also exhibited a higher level of neurological activities in the areas of the brain that are responsible for pain and distress processing. But when a stranger, like a research assistant or the experimenter, held the participant's hand, their perceived and reported levels of pain and distress significantly reduced. And their pain and distress levels reduced even further when it was their partner holding their hand. This study and countless others find that receiving the compassionate support from a person that we care about can greatly reduce our pain, not only on the emotional level, but also on the physiological one. And the science shows us that not only are those needs important, but that having those needs met can actually reduce our pain and suffering. And so if we're able to be present with our struggles, if we're able to receive kindness and support from the people that we love the most, perhaps over time we can learn to love our injuries. Maybe we can learn to recognize that the very part of us that some people might have tried to shut out or to shame, maybe the very part of us that we most often feel the need to hide, is perhaps the most powerful and the most beautiful part of you. A few years ago, I was working with a client whose parents brought her in for post-traumatic stress disorder. Let's call her Lisa. Lisa had been sexually assaulted by her partner. Her parents could not understand why their daughter developed PTSD. After all, she said, it was her boyfriend. They also could not understand why Lisa had maintained her symptoms for over 6 months. They tried to shame her into getting over it. It didn't work. It only made her shut down. So during our first few sessions, we tried to talk, but Lisa could barely speak. Her voice was long buried under the oppressive messages that she was made to believe. So I decided to switch gears a little bit, and I asked Lisa if she had a favorite television show, a movie, or a book. And she mentioned that she was a big fan of the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In case you're not familiar with the show, it is about a teenage girl named Buffy who is a high school student by day and a vampire slayer by night. So I asked Lisa to share some of her favorite storylines and episodes with me. In finding this permission to talk about her passion, Lisa slowly started regaining her voice. She started sharing about Buffy's experiences of struggling to manage her responsibilities and that she related to it. I later asked Lisa whether Buffy had ever experienced anything traumatic. And she said that in one of the episodes, Buffy sacrificed herself to save her little sister's life. And that sometime later, Buffy was brought back to life by dark magic, only she doesn't quite come back the same. She has nightmares and flashbacks. She engages in risky and self-destructive behaviors, and she doesn't wish to face her trauma. Her suffering lasts for many months, and in other words, Buffy meets all the classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So I then asked Lisa if there was ever a time that Buffy disclosed her situation or her symptoms to anyone else. And she told me that Buffy disclosed what she was going through to her friend Spike. I asked her to pull up that clip on her phone, and she did, and we watched it together. We watched Buffy tell Spike, "Everything here is hard," she said. "Everything is bright and violent. Everything I feel, everything I touch. This is hell. Just getting through the next moment and the one after that." And right as we're watching this clip, Lisa points to the screen and she says, That is what I go through each and every day." And it was the first time since her assault that she was able to talk about how she felt. And that night, she was able to show that entire episode to her parents, who for the first time were able to understand what their daughter was going through. And so you see, sometimes seeing heroes reclaim their lives in fiction might allow us to reclaim our voices. Because for so many of us, heroes are more than fiction. They are our voice when we cannot speak for ourselves. They are the expression of our emotions, and most importantly, they are our call to freedom in changing our own narrative. This very realization happened to my other client, Jamie, this is not her real name, who came to see me for social anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. Jamie sat in a small, demure posture. She spoke in a soft, quiet voice. And she stated that she had a really hard time advocating for herself. She also mentioned that she was the only woman in her department and the only one that hadn't been promoted in several years. I then asked Jamie if there were any movies, books, or television shows that she enjoyed. And Jamie said that she liked Star Wars. And I said, "Great, I love Star Wars. Who's your favorite character?" And she said, "Kylo Ren." That's how she said it, Kylo Ren. Now, in case you're not familiar with this character, Kylo Ren is the main villain, or some might call him an anti-hero, in the Star Wars trilogy, episodes 7 through 9. So I asked Jamie, "What is it that you like about Kylo Ren?" And she said, "I like that he gets angry." And I said, "Wow, do you ever get angry?" And she said, "Oh no." You see, Jamie was taught that she's not allowed to feel and express anger, and that she has to put other people's needs above her own. And so over the next few months, Jamie and I worked together on channeling her inner dark side, on embodying Kylo Ren, but without killing people, of course. And then, after a few months, she requested a meeting with her boss, and she asked for a raise. And you know what? She got it. And so to celebrate, she went to Disneyland and built herself her very own Kylo Ren lightsaber. And now she cosplays, which means dresses up as her favorite characters at different comic conventions. She dresses up as Kylo Ren or other characters as her way of maintaining her voice and her self-expression. And so what it comes down to is this. You're allowed your emotions. You're allowed your voice. And you're allowed your journey. You're not helping anyone by staying quiet, by fitting yourself into someone else's story. You were not meant to be someone else's sidekick. You're meant to be the hero of your own story. And if you've ever read fantasy books, you might have read about a creature called the phoenix. The phoenix is this magical bird believed to come from the sun. And like many of us humans, the phoenix sometimes goes through excruciating changes from time to time. And when that happens, the phoenix bursts into flames and then falls into ashes. But then the phoenix rises again, stronger than ever before. And in fact, sometimes our experiences like trauma, anxiety, or heartbreak can feel like we're on fire. And this here, right now, this is your phoenix moment. This is you rising from the ashes, regaining your voice, writing your own story on your own blank piece of paper, as if to say, I am here. I have awakened. Thank you.